Hey, Everyday Athlete Podcast Network listeners, welcome back to the next Enduring Minds episode. I am one of your co-hosts, Jason Bahamundi, and I am being joined by Evan Birch, who I will bring on in a second. But before we get started, please be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and if you use Spotify, make sure you comment on our posts. It really does help the algorithm move our shows to the top of the list. And I will say this, I just looked at our Spotify for Creators Wrapped, and our audience is up just shy of 1,000%. You could have been the person who got us to that 1,000%. So make sure you subscribe, rate, and review, and comment if you're using Spotify. And if you're on YouTube, make sure you do the same there. Now, let me bring on my co-host, Evan Birch. Evan, how are you doing today?
I am rested and ready. Let's say that today. Yeah.
Very good. How's the ankle holding up?
It's getting better every day. I'm still doing my uphill treadmill work and doing my strength each week and just trying to make sure that I'm healthy moving into the new year. And I'm not one for New Year's resolutions. So I just want to be moving in that upward trend. That's all I want to be.
The whole point of this show is sort of the mental health side of it all. And obviously, you've had a setback with your ankle at Tahoe. Now that it's progressing, like, can you feel like the mental aspect, the mental side of endurance sports training going in the upward trajectory as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things we talk about all the time. Like, take the time to wallow as long as you need to, but put a deadline on it. And I gave myself that deadline of a month afterwards. And I feel like it's just been, a few steps forward, a few steps back. But the mental shift that I had to make for this time around, having been off probably the longest I've been off since I went off for my own mental health from running, has been incredible to see that I have this like fire building again to want to get back to running. And that's how I know that things are progressing the way that I want, is like I see these races and I see these things that other people doing, and I have this fire, not because I'm missing out, but because it's something I want.
Yes, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking to Hal Jankowski, who is a member of the Everyday Athlete Clubhouse like yourself. For those of you who are listening, if you don't know about the Everyday Athlete Clubhouse, make sure you check it out on runtrymag.com. Go to the shop button. It'll drop down. You can click on it and read all about it, and we can talk about it later. I wanted to get Hal on the show because when I interviewed him for his How It All Started feature, how he got started into running immediately made me say, we need to bring Hal on to talk to him about the mental aspect of getting into running and why he did it. And so I don't want to ruin this interview by giving too much away. So I'll bring Hal on and we'll just get into it. Hal, how are you? Thanks for joining us today.
I am doing all right, man. I'm looking forward to it. It could be a good conversation, I hope.
Us too. Oh, it absolutely will be. So one of the things that we have changed from our season 1 in 2025 to second half of 2025, season 2, is instead of us giving a full-blown profile of our guests, we're simply asking them, who is Hal Jankowski?
And it's funny. I was prepared for this, right? I did my homework a little bit too, and I thought, oh man, like how in the world am I going to answer that question? I think your last guest, I could give you, this is what I do for a living and this is my family. But that's like the least interesting stuff about me, which I mean, is true. It really is. I don't know, when you say, when you ask me that question, who am I and how would I identify, particularly this audience, I would say I'm a late blooming, a late blooming endurance athlete. I never, ever in my wildest dreams growing up would have thought that I would get into the sport the way that I've gotten into. I have never cared about like who is who in what sports. I never really cared about watching anything live. Now, of course, I went to the University of Kentucky, so of course I watch UK basketball, but I can't tell you anything about it, right? I'm just there for the vibes and the experience. So, I mean, I would say in this context, that's Hal. Hal is also somebody who's just trying to figure it out. I sometimes say, I'm 44 years old and I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I mean, my life has taken a particular trajectory. My career has taken a particular trajectory. I've got, 2 kids, been married almost 20 years. and like to just live life and have experiences. That's the kind of stuff that I do. But I am really just kind of like, I don't want to say flying by the seat of my pants, but I'm still figuring it out, right? Day by day, I'm still trying to figure out my place in the world, and just hope that whatever it ends up being, that it's a positive impact for myself and the people around me, I guess.
I think that's a super honest response about I'm trying to figure it out as opposed to I've got it all figured out. And I'll remind Evan about what Peter Versio said to us on episode 1 of season 2, which was essentially like those that we see on social media portraying this fully put together life are hiding so much shit, right? Like they're just hiding so much shit that they need to just let it loose and say exactly what you said, which is I'm trying to figure it out, like we all are. Mm-hmm. And I'm gonna jump the gun on Evan too. Like he's going back to get his master's degree right now, right? So he's navigating the wilderness and trying to figure it all out. And I think we all are. And I think that's the beauty of every one of these conversations that we have on Enduring Minds. And normally I would ask a person like you said father first, or you said endurance athlete first, and why did that come to mind? But you answered it. You said in the context of this show. If you were on another show, do you think your response would be different?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, I mean, if we were talking about like, what do I do professionally, I would have probably led with my job, right? Or if, like any sort of family oriented thing, it would have been, I'm a father and a husband. But like, context is king. I say that a lot. So yeah, in this context, that's the first thing that came to mind. And I actually think, again, in this context and in the way that it came about, me coming to talk to you guys today, most of the people who are going to be listening to this maybe will have read the article by this point. They're going to see, oh, he didn't start doing this until he was old, right? Like I was already a master. I always joke. I said, this is the only time I will ever be a master at anything athletic wise is, being an over 40 runner. But like, I mean, I didn't start that until, I was 41. And it's like inspiring to me actually to see people who started even later than I did. But like, I don't know. I don't necessarily know where I'm going with that other than to say like, this is how people know me in this audience. But I mean, obviously I'm so much more than that, right? There's so many other things that, I can talk about for what makes up Hal.
Yeah. The price of being good at something is at first you must be shit. And that's what I think about for anybody that wants to try anything, whether it be running, whether it be me going to get my master's degree and having to do academic writing for the first time in literally ever. You have to be willing to be okay with being shit first. And I think coming into it at an older age, you have all of this life that has happened to you, a career, kids, family, all of these things that you can pull from, that you're now putting yourself in a position where you're choosing your hard. And I would imagine running was not easy at first when you first got back into it. I mean, I know you did a little bit in college, like you said, but it was minimal, but really doubling down and getting into it at 41. What was it like at first, those first few months that everybody sees as like the hardest? Like you're building your base, you're getting into it and you're finding your way. What was it like?
I think that's a really good question. There it is, right? That's a really interesting question. And I think, there's two minds, right? So there's the what I think is going on, and then there's when I look back and think about how other people perceived or responded to what I was saying, right? So I mentioned in the interview that I said, all right, I'm going to put this out into the ether. I'm going to run my first 5K. And then I just kept saying it to the point where, well, hell, I've put it out there so much, I actually need to go register for this thing. And that's kind of what happened. There would be people who would notice like the physical change as I was losing weight, and they would comment and they'd say, oh, like, what are you doing? And I go, oh, I've kind of started running. I think I'm going to try to run the 5K and the flying pig. And they're like, oh, that sounds awesome. Like, good for you. Like, I can't imagine running. And I'm over here going, God, I'm terrible. Right. Like, so, you start out and you're like, oh, I'm shit at this. And yeah, I mean, and honestly, I don't know. I don't refer to, my skill level or where I'm at like that today. Right. Because I understand that there's so much more to running than like defining yourself by any one metric. But, back then it was, people were being supportive, but internally I'm going, well, yeah, but I'm not any good at this. Can I do this? I mean, my gosh, I remember looking at the training plan going, oh, this is going to have me run 4 miles before I ever get to the 5K. And I'm going, well, that's interesting. Like, I thought it was a little different. Now, of course, I know a little bit more about training for the various distances, but at the time I go, well, I mean, that should be a confidence booster, but can I do 4 miles? Right. And I mean, once I did, I was like, all right, cool. Like, I've done this. And so no matter what happens, I'll at least finish. And I don't even know that I necessarily had a time goal. I think I was trying to figure out, well, what do I want to see? I was trying to figure out, can I do it? And then what does that mean for what happens going forward? And I think that there was still an awful lot of imposter syndrome for, I mean, even that first year and a half. Right. I mean, it was, I think I was a lot harder on myself than everyone else around me. And I do think that that's framed the way that I interact with other people when they tell me they're getting into running, or they make a comment to me like, gosh, running is so hard. Like, I feel like I just can't catch my breath when I start running. And I'm like, okay, well, but you're getting out there and you're doing it. So let's talk about that if you want, So yeah, I mean, I think that that's how it started and how it's kind of been developing for sure, and how it's, influenced the way that I interact with folks who are getting into it now, or even, trying to get better as I'm trying to get better, whatever better means.
You mentioned the word metrics in there, and metrics for a lot of people are very hard and fast numbers, data. How fast did I run? What was my average pace? What was the elevation? All of these other things. But I have myself leaned more into the metrics of, like, how am I feeling on these runs? Because data, to me, is like, data becomes stale. It's great. It's a great marker for things, but you could look at all of the data across all your runs for the last 2 months. But if you felt like shit on all of them internally, then that doesn't mean anything. So what are your internal metrics for measuring your kind of trajectory from those first few months into now looking at training for your first marathon?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are the internal metrics that you base your running on now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's honestly, you say, how do I feel? Right. I mean, you mentioned that for yourself, and I ask myself that question a lot. I mean, I did an easy treadmill run last night, and I started out, and it wasn't like so here's how I operate with the treadmill, and I don't, maybe other people do it this way, maybe they don't, but I tend to use the treadmill as, I am going to make this the easiest thing that I can do for me physically, while still like sort of building that fitness. So that's when I do like my slower runs, my truly easy runs, try to keep heart rate down or whatever. And then I can just turn that piece of the brain off. And I feel like since I ran Detroit, every time I've been doing that on the treadmill, it's not really been, I haven't necessarily felt good, right? Like, I've been like, I've not felt terrible. I've gotten it done, but I've not started on a run going, oh, this feels pretty good. I feel like I can do this for forever. Versus like last night, I started running and I go, all right, this is a little different. Like, this is positive. I feel like, I feel like maybe I'm starting to come out a month and a half later after Detroit back into, this is actually like feeling good, not feeling like something I need to do to maintain fitness or bridge the gap between training cycles. So, I mean, it definitely is something that I pay attention to beyond the metrics. Like, how do I actually feel? Like, what am I thinking? I have like a lot of this little self-talk, which I'm sure a lot of us do, right? Where, I say, okay, like, not worried about speed or pace while I'm doing these treadmill runs. So I'm going to focus on other things. Like, what does my footfall feel like? Oh, are my shoulders shrugging up? Oh, don't have T-Rex arms. Like, all of those little things. But then also going, all right, like, am I breathing? Am I breathing in a way that is relaxed and easy? How does that feel? How do I feel mentally? Because, like, there's a lot of times where people talk about treadmill, dreadmill, right? Where I don't have quite the same reaction, but there are definitely times where it's terrible. And I'll get, 25 minutes into a 40-minute run and I'm like, when is this going to end? But then I have to say, okay, let's not focus on the time. Let's think of something else. Think of anything else. I listen to music when I run, especially on the treadmill. And I'm like, all right, maybe if I can just get through this song, if I can get through the next 2 minutes, and my mind will shift into something else. And inevitably it does. Inevitably it just happens and I get back into a rhythm and I go, okay, I feel good, right? Like, this feels all right. And then there are definitely times where I use those instances to kind of like zone out. I don't want to say like escape from reality, but like help me manage whatever's going on mentally and emotionally in the rest of my life. Full transparency, like, there's a significant change to my reporting line here at the university. And there's a lot of uncertainty because of that change to my reporting line. So I've been under a little bit of stress the last couple of weeks. And I've used these runs to go, all right, this is my time to sort of decompress and like channel that energy into the into motion, into something that's going to be productive in a way other than just sitting and stewing and wallowing.
You mentioned, how do I feel? That was kind of the premise. And then you talked about transparency right now. I want to go press rewind for a moment and go to when you first got into running, because you thought you were having a heart attack. And, it turned out to be stress and anxiety. And I want to know, if you don't mind sharing with the audience, how running either did it help alleviate that stress and anxiety? And as you've gotten deeper into running, has it added to it? In other words, you're training for your first marathon in 2026. And you said when you would run you were getting ready for a 5K, other people were like, that's really cool and that's awesome. And you were asking yourself, can I do this? And as we get deeper into running and you progress in distance, you start seeing other people doing other things, and they might be running faster, they might be running further, right? And all of a sudden, maybe the anxiety shifts to a performance level. And so if you don't mind walking us through that anxiety, stress to get started, and has that shifted any, and is running helping and or hurting as you go along?
Sure. So before I answer that question, one of the things that I think I told you that I wanted to make sure that what was important to me was making sure that people understood that we talked more about how like mental health presents itself, particularly in men and whatnot. And so you mentioned, I thought I was having a heart attack. And so I maybe if just for a brief moment, I kind of want to point out and say that like I did not have the language for what was going on at the time. Like now in hindsight, I know that what I was experiencing, like the racing heart and like the chest, what it was, why I thought I was having a heart attack, I was like, my chest felt like it was like kind of caving in on itself. And it was an anxiety attack is exactly what it was. Now, I'm not saying that anytime your chest hurts, right, that's not something cardiac related, but obviously you need to get it checked out. But like, I think maybe to help people understand how these things manifest, right? Like everyone's different, obviously, but that's what was happening to me. Right? Like I had the physical pain, I had the numbness, and then it would get better when I would do something. And I don't think people understand that that is a way that this stuff manifests, right? So like, hopefully people will start to take some of that stuff away from our conversation and go, oh, maybe when that's happened to me, that's something that I should think about and get checked out. Now, getting to your question about like, how has running help me manage the anxiety and getting into this new season, is it adding to or the moderating somehow? And here's what I'll say, like in perfect honesty, those conversations that I was having training for that first 5K, I'm having today, right? I have never run more than 13 miles or 13 and a half miles. So like I'm looking at, oh, middle of January, I'm going to have my first greater than 13-mile run. Can I do that? Like I'm literally having those conversations and then I go, nope, we're not there yet, right? We're not there yet. Just take a step back and know that if you can do 13, you can do 14. If you can do 14, you can do 15. You don't do it all at once. You do it stepwise. You asked another question about like, as you see what other people do and you start to think about like pace or whatever. I mean, I think that in full honesty, I mean, do I wish that I ran faster? Sure. Do I wish that it were easier for me to run longer distances without getting into this training cycle, never having done it before? I mean, of course I do. But I will say that one of the things that I like repeat to myself over and over again is comparison is the thief of joy, right? Like I'm not doing this because I am trying to compete with the person who's running beside me. I am doing this because there's something about the experience that I want to improve on for myself, either because I'm trying to work on increasing distance or because I'm trying to work on speed or because I'm trying to work on understanding my body and managing load, or I'm trying to work on some mental aspects of it. When I did that 3-way with cheese challenge last year, it was the first time that I had ever done like 2-a-day workouts, but I didn't really do like a true 2-a-day because the way that I was trying to mimic what was happening on race weekend. So I would run, some distance, whatever it was, and then I'd give myself about 45 minutes and then I'd run half that distance because that's exactly what happened during that weekend. But like I'm going, I've got to take a 45-minute break. Do I really want to get back into this and run? If I just ran an hour, run another 30 minutes, it usually ended up being more than that. I think I only did that once. So usually it was like I just ran, an hour and 15 and now I got to run 45. Like, that was hard sometimes. But I knew that like I was doing it for myself. I didn't give myself the anxiety of comparing myself to what other people were doing. I used their experience, right? That's where I got the idea of train for the race that you want to run, because that was stuff that people had told me was, you will do yourself a favor if you structure your training in the way that that your weekend is set up. But that was kind of the extent of it. Like I didn't give myself a time goal. I just said, I want to get to the end of the weekend having successfully done these 4 events and not feel absolutely wrecked. And to hell with what anyone else thinks or what anyone else's times are. And in fact, I would say that in order to help other people, I ran with 3 other people from the pace group that I lead for Tri-State. And I intentionally like slowed myself down so that I could stay with them so that they would feel comfortable, right? I also sometimes make it about someone other than me in order to help manage everything else that's going on up here.
I think you hit on something beautiful, Hal, when it comes to the things you were talking about that you were focusing on. And I come back to that being a difference between an outcome goal and a process goal. And really the outcome goal is the finish line that, I don't want to be last. I want to be in the middle of the pack, whatever that is, like time-based this, pace this. But the process goals are really about like how you want to feel. Do you want to be, feeling happy about the effort that you put in at the end? Do you want to be feeling joy during the run? All of these things that people can also focus on, which it sounds like you've already been doing, which is amazing. But do you have any, I guess, feedback to the listeners or anything about how do you focus less on the outcome and more on the process?
I think maybe it's remembering there are some things that you can control and some things that you can't. And so you got to remember that you focus on what you can control. And I can't necessarily control what happens when I go do the thing, right? So great example, and completely related to everything that we're talking about here. I had a goal of finishing Detroit in 2 hours, 20 minutes or less. And that did not happen. And I resigned myself to, as I realized that wasn't going to happen. I was like, all right, like I've got to adjust in the moment, but I was generally okay with it because I couldn't control what was necessarily happening on race day, but I could control how I responded to it. I could control everything leading up to it. So I knew that I had put in the work and I had done everything I needed to do. But for whatever reason, on race day, it just didn't turn out the way that I was hoping that it would turn out. And, I kind of let go of that in the moment. Now, there was something that that you said that I wrote down that I kind of wanted to hit on, which was, like wallow, but set a deadline. Right. Like, I was disappointed. Like, I mean, I had a PR, for crying out loud, in Detroit, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And so, like, I was really sort of like struggling with like, how do I reconcile this? Like, how do I reconcile the fact that I still ran my best half marathon, but it was not the goal that I had set for myself? And it basically came down to feel the feelings, like allow yourself to feel them. But at some point we have to move on and channel that energy into something else. And I think that when you say, like, how do you manage the way you feel about an outcome versus a process, or how do you make sure that you think about those things correctly? I mean, I think it is feeling the feeling, but managing and focusing on what you actually can do something about. I can't do anything about the time that I actually ran in Detroit, but what I could do when I realized that that PR wasn't going to happen was go, all right, in the moment, I know that I can salvage my PR if I switch my strategy. Right. In the moment, I was running with the 220 pacer and should not have done that, honestly, like looking back on it, because that's not how I trained. But, I got to a certain point and I'm like, I can't do this. I have to shift strategies. And I look at the watch and I go, okay, we're going to switch to intervals, because intervals I know I can do, and intervals would take me through the last 5 miles. And it did. It did. And I salvaged my PR, but that was what I could control. And I didn't focus on, oh, I'm not going to hit my 220 pace, or my 220 goal, but I'm going to get to the finish line and I'm still going to have a PR, and I'm going to respond to my environment, which is what I can control. It's my response, not necessarily what happens.
Yeah, I completely agree, Hal. It's the terminologies I like to use are here and now and manage the moments. And I think that's what you can do in those situations is you can control what you can control, but you have to manage the moment that is here right now. You can't manage it any other way than how you're feeling and where your body is in that moment and where your feet are right now.
Yeah.
I saw Jason feverishly writing there, so I think he's got a question for you.
I wrote down reconciling. That's the word you used. And the question I wrote was reconcile without running. So you use running initially to deal with the anxiety and the stress and clear your mind and get physically healthier. But you're now dealing with this idea of recovery from the Detroit half and trying to reconcile. What did you do? Was it a scenario in which you sat down and read? What are your other tools, I guess is really the question. What are your other tools that help you to reconcile and calm yourself down when you can't run in this particular case, because you just finished running a half marathon, you need to rest and recover?
Yeah. I mean, I think you find some other outlet, I guess, right? Like whether it's spending time with your family or for me, right? Spending time with the family. I do cook. I would like to say that I like to read. I like to do other things that give me an outlet. I write, actually. I'm not very good at it unless there's something that's like really, really brewing, but I do find that as a tool for me, if something is really, really bothering me, being able to write it out. Write out, like, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm thinking. If you've ever been through therapy, especially like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, you talk about like thinking traps or erroneous thinking, or like fallacious things that go on in your head, and challenging those things and asking yourself, like, what's real? What do I know? Am I overreacting? Like thinking through all of the different sort of fallacies that go through your head. So being able to write and process that stuff, it also helps me sort of reconcile like what's going on in the world around. Now, I would say that I should be here I go judging myself, right? But like I should be a better practitioner of this stuff. I should do it when I don't need it, right? Because then it becomes a lot more accessible. But I know that when I'm in a season where things are particularly heavy, if I can just get it out on paper, that also helps moderate whatever's going on, in my head or in my feelings.
The irony of us starting this conversation about being shit before you get better, and you literally saying I could be better at writing,
Yeah.
it's thick. The irony is thick in this particular case, right? Get the pen out and or your keyboard and just start doing it, and before you know it.
And here's what's funny. Like I sit here and told you that I'm like thick about it and I'm not very good. It literally is in my backpack. It is sitting in my backpack and I don't pull it out and actually like write stuff down. So like, like I know that I could do better, but it's still, it's a tool. It's a tool that I use when I need to use it, when I feel like I need to use it. I will also say that I have gotten a lot better about talking. There might have been, there is no might. There was a time where like I would not articulate verbally what I was feeling, either because I didn't feel like I could, or because I didn't feel like I had the language. I mean, even with my spouse, right? Even with Stacy, there would be times where I'm like, I can't talk about this. And as I've worked my way through my own journey, I've learned to become more comfortable with saying what I'm feeling, putting words to what's going on. So that someone else knows, right? So that I'm not either not carrying the burden alone, or so that I'm not leaving other people wondering what the hell's going on. I don't really like to, I don't like to live in ambiguity. I mean, I know that that's not always possible, right? But like, I want to be as clear with folks. And sometimes there's vulnerability with that. I mean, I'll tell my staff that I work with, like, hey guys, I might be feeling a certain way. If I'm acting a certain way, call me out on it, right? Let me know in the moment, because I might not be aware. And I want you to know that you have that permission. And then maybe we can talk about like what I'm feeling, or like what's going through my head. Why am I behaving the way that I am? But even, talking to my friends or talking to Stacy, it will be like, I feel when X happens, I feel because, right? It's it's very formulaic, but that's a way that's really helped me. It's a tool that's helped me become more articulate about what's going on. And then also saying like, things won't change if I don't acknowledge, sort of the elephant in the room. And I do usually lead with, I had a conversation with somebody the other day, sharing with them something that they did made me feel a certain way. But I definitely started it with, listen, I need to share with you how I feel. These are my feelings. I own them. I'm the one that has to work through them. But in order to clear the air, I need to share with you when this happened, I felt because, right? And whether or not they heard it, who cares, right? It worked for me, right? It helped articulate for me what was going on, and I felt better. I mean, like, is that fair to necessarily disregard other people's feelings? I can't control those, though, right? So getting back to what can I control versus what I can't, and I can control my response, and my response is basically saying, I owe it to us in this relationship to make sure that you understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah, Jason and I had our wives on for the first episode of the season this year. That was an idea I brought to Jason, because I think you touched on, and you gave me the perfect segue, starting to talk about your wife, Stacy. So thank you. I think far too many men underestimate how they actually feel day to day, because they don't have an awareness of it, because they don't think that they are supposed to have feelings. And that to me is like such a deep seated thing for me that I've had to get over. And, having our wives on, it was enlightening and illuminating in so many ways. And we're going to do it again. But I want to come back to your story, Hal, and what it was like when you realized that something was going on with your body that you didn't really know how to manage, and having that person that you can go to, that you trust, that is your person in life. Walk us through that conversation with your wife and how that felt initially bringing it up and how you feel about that conversation now.
Yeah. So with the article that Jason wrote in the last couple of weeks, Stacy was so funny because she read it and she goes, Hal, I don't remember this conversation. And I was like, oh, it totally happened. Obviously, it stuck with me. It absolutely happened. And I mean, so I would say that like my own mental health journey, it's been so much better over the last 5 years as I've learned more, but it is longer than 5 years, right? Like that heart attack incident, that first thing, well, it wasn't even the first anxiety attack, but like the anxiety attack that I think sort of was the catalyst for this whole journey was like 10 years ago, right? I think I was 34. And we tried some medicine, we tried, I wasn't super thrilled with the idea of therapy. I was very resistant to it, so I didn't do it. That may have been part of the reason why I suffered for so long. But like, I mean, even not having language for what was going on or not understanding, or maybe honestly, it was the therapy that I did with the second sort of bout of figuring out how to live with what I was going through. That made things better, but like I didn't have the language, I didn't know exactly what to say, and probably suffered longer and didn't talk it out, didn't tell people, didn't feel like I had anyone that I could trust with what was going on in my head, even I even could have articulated what was going on in my head. But I know that like post COVID, I mean, COVID was bad on everybody, right? I mean, like people, I think really in the moment we're like, oh, this is great. We get to stay at home and we don't have to go out and we have a lot less pressure on our time. But I mean, we're not built like that. We're social creatures, right? We need to get out and be part of the world, whatever that means. And I don't think that did me any favors that year, certainly. And we get to the end of that year, and the world still isn't back to normal, 2020, 2021. And I think I just got progressively worse, right? Because I wasn't talking to anybody. I wasn't interacting with folks the same way that I was prior to that. And I think there was just a tipping point. There was a tipping point at some point where like Stacy would be like, hey, do you want to work out with me? And I'd be like, nah, I'm good. Like, and that would be the end of the conversation. And I would just sit on the couch and like watch her do whatever she was doing, or I'd be like, I really just don't want to be around my family or my kids. So I'm going to go down in the basement and, like cover myself with all of the blankets so that like I'm still here, but I'm not here, right? You don't know where I am. At some point, I don't quite know really what the catalyst was, but there was a point where, and this is the part that she doesn't necessarily remember, but it stuck out to me, is when she said to me, like, dude, something is just not right. Like, she goes, I don't know what it is, but something is not right. You really should go talk to the doctor. You really need to figure this out. And I mean, like, I don't know that this was ever in her mind, but it was sort of like the kick in the pants for me, where it was like, if I don't do this, I'm going to lose her, right? This is not the thing that I want to happen. And I don't know that she would ever say that, but I certainly know that was part of what was going through my head at the time. And I also wanted to figure out why I felt the way I felt, because I didn't understand it, right? So, I went to the doctor. And we talked about like everything that I was feeling. And then it was, me going, okay, like this is my primary care provider. I have to be honest. I have to like lay it all out on the line, everything, good, bad, and ugly. And that was uncomfortable, right? I mean, so the initial conversation, obviously, have somebody saying, you got to go figure out what's going on. And then in my head going, oh shit, like, this is really bad. If she is telling me that something is going on, something is really bad, and my whole world could be completely, blown apart. To then even going to the doctor and being like, okay, this is how I'm feeling. These are the physical symptoms that I'm having, like everywhere. And then the doctor saying, all right, well, we can do blood panels and, check, thyroid levels and hormone levels and, all of your other blood markers, and make sure that like, because I was very significantly overweight, am I diabetic, or do I have hypothyroidism or whatever? And, there are, sorry, I got distracted. So we ran through that like whole battery of tests and talked about things. And she said, sometimes medication that you're on, which I'd been on for 5 years at that point, sometimes it poops out, and you've got to try something different. And she said, so here's something else that won't have some of the side effects that you're feeling, but will hopefully moderate like whatever your emotion is. And oh, by the way, I know I said this to you before, but you really should do therapy. So, right. So we did, like all of the blood panel. I mentioned that, I had really bad snoring. So we set up the sleep study. We changed my medication. I started going to therapy. I started working out, finding other outlets, and like actually forcing myself to not wrap myself in blankets on the couch in the basement. Saying like, if I don't want to have another one of these conversations, if I don't want to lose my entire life, I have got to do something. And, Stacy did tell me as she read the article, she goes, thank goodness you didn't say that you started running for me. As her saying that, it was more about like, this is how my whole family does it, or responds to it. And I think that that's the case here, right? Like, I mean, obviously that was the catalyst, was not wanting to lose my family, but I also knew the reason why that was even an issue in the first place was because I was not right. I was not healthy. I needed to get healthy for myself.
Can you recall your reaction to the doctor saying, I recommend therapy?
I laughed.
So a wall was
like, but I mean, like where I was at that moment was I wasn't at rock bottom. I don't think. I mean, it's hard to tell, but I mean, I definitely was like, I think that this is going to be woo. I think that this is not going to be for me. I don't know how I'm going to feel about it. But you know what? I'm willing to put in the work and willing to try to figure something out. And I mean, and I didn't stay in therapy for forever, but I kid you not, like I walked into that first session and I was like, all right, what's the end goal? And the therapist was like, yeah, why don't we take a step back a little bit? We don't want to put a timeline on this. You won't have to do this forever, but, as long as it feels like you have the ability to get the tools. And of course, I'm using this inflection because that's how it sounded in my head, like very, very woo, very like whatever. But, the more that I went and the more that I realized that I was actually in control of the conversation. That was the other thing that I think freaked me out about going to therapy, was I thought, well, you're just going to dig into things and I'm going to have to tell you everything, either whether or not I'm comfortable with it. And then the more that I went, the more that I was like, oh, I don't have to do that. It obviously works better the more open I am, but if there's some place that I don't want to go, I don't have to go there. I am in control of this whole situation. And I think once I understood that, it started to make a lot more sense. But I mean, even going, just starting it, I started to realize that, oh, hey, this is a tool, right? This is a tool in a toolbox to help me with everything else. And as I, started dealing with my overall physical health and my fitness, and like actually developing the language and learning the tools for how to, fix the not negative thinking, but the thinking, the thought fallacies, and recognize what those were, putting names to them, and learning strategies for how to move past them. I mean, and I still use all of that stuff now, but like, oh, it's a tool, and I used it for when I thought I needed it, and now I know that if it's something that I need to use again, like I understand the value of it now.
I wrote down woo because this year has become for me the year of woo. Prior to this year, I would have fought tooth and nail about data. Look at the data, like removing emotion from it all. And I've really leaned into this whole idea of the woo, as we're calling it, and perspective. And Evan and I talk about this just about every single episode, is like the perspective of where we are at, where we were, who we know, how we've gotten to where we are today. And some of the things I wrote down as you were talking were, part of your answer reminded me of like when we go to the eye doctor And like people will cheat on the eye exam, right? Okay, big E, MNOP, whatever else is up there on the screen. And all they're doing is cheating themselves into getting better, right? And oftentimes when somebody comes up to us and says, how are you doing? Including our significant other, we often say, I'm good, right? Instead of giving the woo answer, which is, man, I feel like shit. Like I'm stressed out. I'll tell you, I have the worst pain in my left shoulder right now. And I know for a fact it's from stress. And I've been telling this to Lori for like the last 3 or 4 days. Like I can't figure out what is stressing me out, but it's sitting here on top of me and it's showing evidence in my left shoulder. And I think if we do that better, instead of cheating on the eye exam, like lean into the woo and say, this is what's stressing me out, then we can start to connect the dots. And while I don't have the answer today, I know I will. And that's kind of where you're coming from, in that you laughed at the therapist at first, and then you showed up, and then you realized I'm in control of this conversation. And all of a sudden things start to get better. If you never do that, that wall is always there. And then you and I aren't having this conversation. And then Evan doesn't get to meet you. And then somebody who's listening to this doesn't say to themselves, I should go to therapy. Like if we were just honest with each other in this way, this world would be so much better. We would be better for ourselves. And so I don't really have a follow-up question. It's just hearing what you're saying and putting all of these things together in the dot connecting world is kind of what got my brain running as you were answering that last question. So I'll turn it over to Evan.
Yeah, I think you hit on something pretty profound there, Jason. And the thought that popped into my mind with all of this is, why do a lot of us have this resistance to therapy in the first place? Like, where did that develop? Because I had it. I didn't, just like you, Hal. I realized after I was trying to win at therapy that was my goal, was winning at therapy. I thought I was perfect patient. I was there all the time and I was winning, but I wasn't giving everything that I had. And we talk about this word control, and I've heard it a couple times. You've mentioned it, like control the controllables, and I believe that in a lot of cases. But I had to get to the place where I was willing to surrender and accept the fact that I had to release the control in order to get better. And I think that was like a very like profound thing for me to change in my mind of, if I don't release this, I may not get better. So for you, from what I'm hearing, is like the control aspect for you to get into therapy was like, I don't have to share everything. I can have this control. At any point in your journey, did you relinquish that control?
I mean, I would say no, not really. I mean, that's the honest answer. I mean, there's definitely some things where I'm like, yeah, I don't want to confront this right now, and that's okay. I mean, I think I know that, and I feel like, if we're all being honest, there are some things that, like, I think all of us are like, nah, that's not really bothering me today. But I don't feel like I need to talk about that. But I mean, I think. Well, I don't know. I guess where else I would go with that. I mean, I don't know. I wonder if some of that is like part of the, the type A, the accountant, like the very numbers oriented thing. Like I feel like in order to navigate this whole space, there's something that I have to hold back, whatever that is. But I don't know. That's the honest answer. And I don't know that I have anything more to that. Like, I never really was like, yeah, here it all is. But I don't know. I'm okay with that.
And holy crap. I never thought about how our professions, whether chosen or whether we chose them or they were chosen for us, impacts us. So for you in accounting, there is a level of perfection that has to be attained. They're just, in order to have proper reports and all of those things, like there is a level of perfection that has to be attained. And when you put yourself into that position, then all of a sudden there's probably this idea of perfection that has to be attained throughout all of the other aspects of life. And Evan, for you working at, emergency services, there's a level of perfection. You have to have the right address to send the person to so that person gets help. And so then all of a sudden there's like this level of perfection. I've operated in the marketing space for my entire career, and I've said it since day one. There is no right or wrong marketing. There's just good or better marketing, period, end of story. And yet somehow I felt like I had to be perfect at marketing. And I stopped coloring outside the lines, which is what marketing should be, color outside the lines. And this conversation has just given me like this light bulb moment for doing that. And so I'll turn it back to you, Hal. Do you think that being in the accounting space and having to be perfect with your data and your numbers and your reports sort of was the impact of I have to win at therapy and going down that process?
So, I mean, let's talk about an evolution, right? Like, this is a sort of like mind blowing moment. I think that as I've worked my way through whatever I'm doing in the mental health space, here's how it's impacted me professionally. I would say that the beginning of my career, it was very much like everything has to tick and tie down to the penny. And now I kind of joke like, I am such the atypical accountant where a lot of the conversation that I have about anything is how material is this? Is this really going to have an impact on someone's decision, or is it good enough? Right? Is it truthy rather than perfect? Right down to the penny. And so like, as I think sometimes people will be like, oh, he's got to have everything in exact proper order. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to drive myself crazy if I do that. So, when you talk about like having this sort of like perfectionist tendencies because of the profession that I'm in, I kind of feel like I've been working on outgrowing that and maturing from that and saying, I think I used the statement, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. And like I've really leaned into that a lot more. Like I try to be honest. Okay, so like professionally, I try to be honest about, well, here are the limitations of what we're doing, right? And here's why I didn't dig as deep as someone else might have, because it's not going to give me anything more that's going to influence your decision beyond what I produced for you. It may not be perfect. It may not be right down to the penny. There's going to be some level of uncertainty in whatever I'm telling you, but for your purposes, it's good enough. And I can go back and spend more time and make this more, more complete, more robust, more have everything tick and tie out to the last penny. But the reality is, it's not going to change the outcome. So I'm going to get you close enough, and we're all going to be okay with that. And I think that that's been like a real maturity for me professionally, and then everywhere else in life too. Like things aren't going to always go the way that I want them to go. So like I've got to be okay with that, or else I'm just going to drive myself crazy. I don't have the mental space or the mental energy to worry about everything being just so. Now, I mean, that makes me sound like sometimes, I guess, like, like maybe I just don't give a shit. But like, no, that's not how it is. I just pick and choose what I give a shit about.
Yeah. You give more shits now than you probably did before.
Yeah.
That's better quality shits.
Yes. There you go. Yeah. And I think we've all heard this phrase of, this is who I am. And there's a lot of times that we can get stuck in our lives about, just kind of focusing on who we are and what people perceive us to be. And I think you're kind of smashing that idea, Hal, of, that's who you were. I don't have to be that same person now, but like you said, that's been an evolution of growth over a long period of time. And I think our society is so quick. We want it now. We want that thing now. And I think what we've learned through all of our podcasts and all of our conversations is that's not possible. You have to, you can't have the summit without the climb is another term that we've used before as well too. And really, like, to me, like, who I am it's my choice. I get to choose. I get to actively choose every single day and, make a vote towards the person that I want to be every single day by the actions that I'm taking. But what I'm hearing, I've heard it a few times, is this idea of fear, and fear being this thing that, I'm afraid of if I'm not going to be able to run that 13 miles. I'm afraid of what's going to happen to me if I don't get healthy, and what is my body going to do? How have you turned fear from a thing that's going to bury you into something that's going to motivate you?
I honestly think the answer, I don't really know. I don't know how good of an answer this is. I don't know. Here we go. I'm trying to win at this. No, but like I don't. I feel like I try to ignore it appropriately, right? And I think maybe the question that I ask myself as I approach something is like, how rational is this? What risk am I really putting myself at? Or is this just me being afraid because it's something that I don't know? And if I don't have the experience, how will I know? I would much rather do something and than not and regret not having done it. Right? I mentioned that when we got to at the beginning of the conversation, we're like, who is Hal? And I say, like I like to live, I like to experience things. Not physical things, right? But like I like to have experiences. And so like I tend to approach things. I never took an improv class, but I love the idea in improv of yes and. I don't like artificially or arbitrarily saying no to things. And even in my job, all right, so here's how we tie this all together. Like people tend to think of the accountant as the no person, and I want to be, well, let's talk about that, right? Let's talk about what the choices are. Here's what you might be giving up if we proceed in this direction versus this direction. But let's work through these scenarios. Let's not be afraid of spitballing something. Let's have the experience, right? And then make a decision based on whatever that is. And so, how do I overcome fear? I think it's me saying, well, is this really rational? And am I going to regret not doing this? Am I, and I don't want to be in a position where I'm like, oh, I didn't even try. Like that's not something that I want to do. I want to not say no, right? I want to be able to say yes and like, all right, what happens if? What happens if I do this 14 miles? What happens if I do this 26 miles? If I can do 26, maybe I can do a 50K, right? I don't know if that's where the journey is taking me, but like, I'm trying to be open to having these experiences rather than letting fear drive whatever I do.
Yeah, I mean, fear at the end of the day is just, it's information. It's whatever feeling we have in our body, whether it's fear, guilt, shame, and all these other things. It's information, and it's what we choose to do with it. As you say, Hal, like we get the choice of how to manage that and how to move forward with it. But that's really what I think people need to understand is it's your body reacting to something that is like a stimulus that's been placed on it, but it's just information. It's not it's not I am fear. It's fear is happening to me right now.
Yeah.
And that's the way that I look at it.
And I think, being able to sort of step back and say, why, right? And you don't always have to have an answer to that question, but to go, I am experiencing this emotion right now. It's information. What is it telling me? What am I not paying attention to otherwise that is eliciting this fear response or eliciting this anxiety response or the shame response? Like, why do I feel the way that I do? And what is the thinking that is leading to that? And is that reasonable? Like, do I need to change my perspective or really challenge, well, what is the core idea that led to me being afraid of running 14 miles and asking that question, can I do it? Right. And the core fear there, like if we're going to unpack all of this, here we go, we're in therapy. Right. So like I'm looking at this and I'm going, well, because I've never done it before. And I don't have the base level of fitness that a lot of other people do because I started this so late in life. So that means that maybe I might not be able to do this, or I'm going to be uncomfortable. Like I'm going to be really sore after I do a 14-mile run. But then I go back, okay, but wait a minute, like you've run 13 miles and you know how you felt. And you know what you need to do in order to not feel that way or to manage that load. And you also know that if it ends up being too much, you can dial it back. Like you can be responsive to whatever is going on. So you cannot say, like how you yourself cannot say, I'm not going to do this because I might be uncomfortable or because I don't think I can do it because one, you're a liar. You know you can do it. and two, you know enough now and you have enough support that you know how to manage whatever comes after it. And you know that it's going to be instructive for the 15-mile run, for the 16-mile run. I think that being able to unpack all of that stuff and sort of separate yourself from the feeling. And this is actually something that the therapist was like, yeah, maybe you probably shouldn't be doing this so much. It's like literally analyzing every little thing. But I mean, that's the brain, right? That's the brain that I inhabit. So there it is.
We talked about fear a little bit, and I have a mantra that I use for when I started Run, Try, Bike, and essentially for all these ideas that have come from it over the last 5 years, which is take risks, bet on yourself. And when I say that to you, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Oh, geez, that I need to do it better. And I say that, just because there are many things, like we've had this whole conversation today about like, how in running, how I've been working to and been reasonably successful at overcoming that. But I mean, I think even professionally, like personally, I think things are fine in that regard. But I mean, like even professionally, there are things like, am I too comfortable? And I've been asking myself that question for too long at this point, right? And so when you say like, bet on yourself, like I go, do I need to do a better job of that? That's exactly what I think of. Every time I've seen you say that for the last several weeks, I'm going, maybe this is your wake up call, Hal. Maybe this is the thing where you need to like actually bet on yourself and put yourself out there professionally in a way that I've never done before.
I'll put it as a ghost post on Threads tomorrow. Not today. I'll put it as a ghost post on Threads tomorrow.
Yeah. Like what? And to the first question that popped into my mind when you said I need to do better, like what is better? Like what is that? What are you measuring yourself against to be better? And who is going to follow up on that on you? Like there's no accountant for being better.
Well, and so, I mean, here goes the honesty, right? We're talking about fear and how I get over the fear. I mean, this is fear. This is fear driven professionally. Why I'm like, oh, I can't bet on myself because, I have a good job and it pays the bills. And if I change things up, then that's going to make things uncomfortable, right? And so like, everything that I talked about, like in the running space, like I really should turn around and do professional, like, in the other domains of my life as well. So
I shit you not. I literally just asked my class this question last night about the fear of losing the job, of speaking up at work so that you can better the work environment for your coworkers, for your employers, for your customers. And the response was, what if I lose my job and I have bills to pay? And I asked them, I said, if you have an opportunity to rent an apartment for $1,500 or $3,000, where do most people go? And they said $3,000. And I said, why do you think that we mostly go to that $3,000 apartment instead of the $1,500 apartment? And it was, well, because somebody else might see my apartment. And my first response was, well, how many people are you inviting over? And before I let them answer that question, I said, okay, now you have a $300 car payment or $800 car payment. Where are most people going? And they say to the $800 car payment because it's a nicer car. And so then I would ask them, so when was the last time you were driving your $800 a month car down the street that you parked and somebody came up to you and went, damn, that car is fire.
Yeah.
And complimented on your car? I'm going to guess it's zero. I said, so why do we always go to this area where I'm going to spend $800 on a car that nobody gives a shit about? I'm going to spend $3,000 on an apartment that nobody's coming over to because we're going to dinner out or we're going to movies out or we're going to run out and nobody's like really coming to the apartment. And it's because we're trying to keep up this premise of keeping up with the Joneses just in case. But if we were to remove the consumerism levels and lowered it just a little bit, then maybe you would take that risk at your job. Maybe you do take that risk at running the next distance race, or maybe we would be less risk averse. We would be more into taking risks and betting on ourselves if we looked at things, and this where perspective comes into play. I've said it before. Many people know this. In my entire life, I've owned 3 cars, and we're leasing a car today. I've owned 3 cars because I just don't give a shit. Like nobody's ever going to come up to me and say, man, look at that broken down piece of crap Honda Element you drive, because they probably didn't see me getting in or out of it ever, right? when we take into perspective, then we can start to do those things where we take risks and bet on ourselves and probably improve our lives instead of worrying about whether or not somebody cares about the car that we're driving.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I echo you, Jason, only from my own experience of having my 20-year career not being taken from me, but I'll say being taken from me in the sense of my mental health told me that I couldn't do it anymore, and that being gone. And now what am I left with? Like, I didn't get to choose that. It chose me. So, like, if you wait for too long to choose the things that you want to go after, eventually universe is going to go like, I'm going to choose it for you, and it's going to be even harder. So you better like go and do the things that you're wanting to do rather than waiting. And I think that that was a heavy one for me, is being kind of kicked down when I was already out.
Yeah, and I think for anybody who's ever been laid off from a job, right, you've had to adjust and pivot and figure things out all along the way, and you make those changes because something got chosen for you. And I wrote this down: release the control to gain the control, and that's essentially what's happening, right? Like if for Evan, moving on from that job, I've been laid off from 2 companies, and I thought I was in control because I was squeezing the hell out of that rock until they came up to me and they were like, look, we didn't get funding for A, B, and C, and we have to let you go. And I was like, oh shit.
Okay, give me the rock.
Right.
Yeah.
It's amazing how we end our show kind of similar to the way we started, which is not with necessarily, who is Hal, but the question we'd ask you is, what's something in 2026 that you'd like to do more of and or less of?
So I am going to put it out there in the ether and respond to your challenge of bet on yourself. And in 26, that is really what I want to try to lean into is, whatever the particular domain is, and in this case, it probably is more like just where I am, the season that I'm in is professionally, like, go take a professional risk that, might be a little scary, but I can do it smart. I have that ability to do that. And I just need to jump off the ledge. So that's what I want to do in 26 is I want to bet on myself more.
Love it. I asked people their goals for 2026 and I had a ton of responses to it. The vast majority of them were running related, distances, times, whatever. I'm going to add your bet on yourself goal to my list of goals. So I will be following up with you in 2026. I will be your accountability partner.
All right, man. That's good. That's helpful.
Hal, I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us on Enduring Minds.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
That was a fun episode, dude. Thank you for being a part of it with me.
Yeah, it's these conversations, as you said, it opens doors for me in my own mind just as much as it does for the guests that we have and the questions that we ask. And I mean, we did nail the first question. He said that's a good question, so that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you're currently training for a marathon.
Yeah.
So your brain is trying to relive likely what your last marathon was. And I'm sure these conversations are just having things spinning for you too.
Yeah, it's wild because you and I have been in the world of ultra running for forever. You said you didn't even run a marathon. And the last time I ran one was 14 years ago. And so on my training plan for today is 4x800s. I am fucking terrified, dude. Like, yes, I did speed work for ultras, but, not worried about getting down into low, fast paces. Like speed work and trail running is much different. And so like, I am terrified, but it is a scenario of I'm taking the risk to see what I can do at the marathon distance for the first time in 14 years and betting on myself. So we'll see what happens. That's really what it ends up being more than anything else.
Yeah, absolutely.
For those of you who have stuck around with us, thank you so much. We appreciate your support. Please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review to the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network on your favorite podcast platform. And if you are using Spotify, please be sure to drop a comment in. We are asking you for 5 stars. If you're inclined to give us anything less than 5 stars, email me, jason@runtrimag.com. I'm happy to answer your questions and see how we can improve so that your time spent with us is as enjoyable as it can be. We'll see you in a couple of weeks on the next episode of Enduring Minds. Have a great one, everybody.